The raging waters of the Laramie River crashed against its banks, swollen from 3 days of relentless spring rain. Amidst the roaring torrent, Abigail Armstrong's desperate cries were barely audible as the muddy ground beneath her feet gave way, sending her tumbling into the merciless current. Her fingers clawed at the slippery bank, but the force of the water pulled her away from the shore with frightening speed. Wyoming Territory, 1875. The untamed wilderness showed no mercy to those who underestimated its power. "Help!" Abigail screamed, her voice breaking as water filled her mouth. The heavy fabric of her dress dragged her downward while the current swept her along. Her long, auburn hair plastered against her face, blinding her as she fought to keep her head above water. Weston Keller had been tracking a small herd of mustangs when he heard the scream. Immediately abandoning his pursuit, he spurred his chestnut stallion toward the river. From atop the ridge, he spotted the woman struggling in the raging waters, her pale arms flailing against the muddy torrent. Without hesitation, Weston leapt from his horse and shed his leather vest and gun belt. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him over the roar of the flood. The icy water shocked his system as he dove into the river. The current immediately pulled at him, but Weston was a strong swimmer, having grown up along the banks of the Mississippi. He cut through the water with powerful strokes, keeping his eyes fixed on the woman's increasingly feeble struggles. Abigail felt her strength fading. Each time she went under, it became harder to fight her way back to the surface. Her lungs burned, and the weight of her waterlogged clothing dragged her downward. Just as she felt herself slipping into darkness, strong arms encircled her waist. "I've got you," a deep voice assured her close to her ear. "Don't fight me, just hold on." Weston tightened his grip on the woman's waist, using all his strength to keep them both afloat. He knew they couldn't fight the current directly. Instead, he angled them toward the shore, working with the flow rather than against it, looking for any place where the bank might provide a handhold. Abigail clutched desperately at her rescuer, her fingers digging into his shoulders. She coughed and sputtered as water splashed into her face, but the firm grip around her waist gave her hope. "There," Weston said, spotting a fallen cottonwood tree extending into the water. "When I say now, grab for that tree." As they swept past, Weston lunged for the tree, one arm still firmly around Abigail. His fingers scraped against the bark, finding purchase just long enough to slow their progress. With a mighty effort, he swung Abigail toward the trunk. "Now," he shouted. Abigail reached out, her fingers closing around a sturdy branch. She held on with all her remaining strength as Weston pulled himself alongside her. Together, they clung to the tree, the river rushing around them with frightening force. "Can you climb?" Weston asked, his blue eyes fixed on her face. Abigail nodded, though she wasn't certain her trembling limbs would cooperate. Inch by inch, they pulled themselves along the trunk toward the shore, the cowboy never letting go of her, his hand either supporting her back or grasping her arm. When they finally reached the muddy bank, Abigail collapsed on solid ground, coughing up river water and gasping for breath. Weston knelt beside her, his own breathing ragged. "You're all right now," he assured her, pushing wet strands of hair from her face. "You're safe." Abigail looked up at her savior for the first time. Water dripped from his dark hair and strong jawline. Despite the circumstances, there was kindness in his eyes. "Thank you," she managed between coughs. "I thought I was going to die." Weston shook his head. "Not while I was around to stop it, madam." A violent shiver ran through Abigail's body, reminding them both of their soaked condition and the cool spring air. "We need to get you warm," Weston said, rising to his feet and scanning the area. "My camp isn't far. Can you walk?" Abigail tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, Weston scooped her into his arms. "I can whistle for my horse," he explained, "but I'm afraid your dress is too heavy with water for you to ride safely. We'll have to walk a bit." Abigail wanted to protest being carried by a stranger wasn't proper, but she lacked the strength. Instead, she found herself resting her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat as he carried her away from the river that had nearly claimed her life. Weston's camp was nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. A canvas tent was pitched near a stone-ringed fire pit, and his supplies were carefully organized nearby. He whistled sharply, and moments later, the chestnut stallion trotted into view. "That's Thunder," Weston said as he gently set Abigail down on a fallen log. "Smartest horse in the territory." He quickly rekindled the fire, building it up until flames licked eagerly at the dry wood. Then he disappeared into his tent, returning with a wool blanket and a flannel shirt. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, politely averting his eyes as he handed her the items. "I'll turn my back. The shirt's not much, but it's dry." Abigail hesitated only briefly before accepting the offered garments. The chill had settled deep in her bones, and propriety seemed less important than avoiding pneumonia. "I'm Weston Keller," he said, his back to her as she struggled with the buttons of her sodden dress. "Most folks call me West." "Abigail Armstrong," she replied, her teeth chattering as she peeled off the heavy, wet fabric. "I'm staying with my uncle at his trading post about 5 miles north of here." "Armstrong Trading?" Weston asked. "Henry Armstrong's place?" "Yes, that's my uncle." Abigail pulled his flannel shirt over her head, grateful for its warmth despite it hanging nearly to her knees. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "You can turn around now, Mr. Keller." Weston turned, relief evident on his face when he saw color returning to her cheeks. He hung her dress on a branch near the fire to dry. "What were you doing by the river alone, Miss Armstrong?" he asked, pouring coffee from a tin pot nestled in the coals. Abigail accepted the steaming cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "I was gathering wildflowers for my botany collection. I've been documenting plant species since arriving from Boston last month." She looked down at her bare feet, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I didn't realize how close I was to the edge until it was too late." Weston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The spring floods can undercut the banks. Ground that looks solid can give way without warning. A lesson I've learned quite thoroughly," Abigail replied with a small smile. "What about you, Mr. Keller? What brings you to this particular stretch of wilderness?" "I'm a horse trader," Weston explained, settling across from her. "I catch wild mustangs, gentle them, and sell them to ranchers or the army. Was tracking a small herd when I heard you call for help." As they talked, the sky began to darken and a light rain started to fall. "We won't be going anywhere tonight," Weston observed, glancing at the clouds. "Your uncle will be worried, but attempting to reach the trading post in this weather would be foolish." Abigail knew he was right, though the thought of spending the night alone with a strange man sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. Yet Weston Keller had saved her life and shown nothing but respect and kindness. "I suppose I have little choice," she conceded. "My uncle will understand once he knows the circumstances." As night fell, Weston prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and patter of rain on the tent canvas creating a peaceful backdrop. "You should take the tent," Weston said as they finished eating. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't put you out of your shelter," Abigail protested. Weston smiled, the firelight highlighting the strong lines of his face. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count, Miss Armstrong." "One more won't hurt me." Abigail wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her. The day's events had drained her completely. With a grateful nod, she retreated to the tent, wrapping herself in the blanket and listening to the gentle rhythm of the rain. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the rush of water pulling her down, the panic of not being able to breathe. After an hour of restless tossing, she emerged from the tent. Weston sat propped against his saddle, hat pulled low over his eyes, but he wasn't asleep. He looked up when she appeared, concern evident in his expression. "Nightmares?" he asked softly. Abigail nodded, settling beside him near the fire. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in the river." "That's natural after what you've been through," Weston said. "The mind needs time to accept that the danger has passed." "Have you ever had such experiences?" she asked. Weston was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "During the war," he finally said. "I was with the 5th Cavalry, saw things no man should have to see. You fought for the Union. Yes, madam, enlisted when I was 18, just a boy thinking war would be an adventure. He shook his head, found out quickly how wrong I was. Abigail studied him in the firelight, seeing the shadows behind his eyes that spoke of hardship and loss. Is that why you choose this solitary life now, after seeing so much death and destruction? Partly, Weston admitted. Out here, things make sense. There's a natural order. Animals don't kill for politics or power, just survival. He looked at her with sudden intensity. What about you, Miss Armstrong? What brings a Boston lady to the Wyoming Territory? Abigail hugged her knees to her chest, considering her answer. After my parents died of influenza last year, I found myself at a crossroads. Society expected me to find a suitable husband and settle into a proper Boston marriage, but I wanted more. She gestured to the wilderness around them. I wanted to see the world my father told me about in his stories. He traveled out west as a young man before returning to Boston to marry my mother. And your uncle welcomed you. Uncle Henry was thrilled. He's been trying to convince my father to visit for years. A sad smile crossed her face. I suppose I'm fulfilling that dream for both of us now. They talked through the night, sharing stories and discovering unexpected commonalities despite their different backgrounds. Weston spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his time in the Army, and his dreams of someday owning a horse ranch. Abigail told him about her education, her passion for botany, and her desire to publish scientific journals about Western flora. As dawn broke, the rain stopped, and they prepared to make the journey to Armstrong Trading Post. Abigail's dress had dried enough to be wearable, though it was stiff with river mud. Weston saddled Thunder, who stood patiently as his master worked. We'll have to ride double, Weston explained, extending his hand to help her mount. Thunder's strong enough to carry us both. Abigail placed her foot in his interlaced fingers and allowed him to boost her onto the saddle. Weston swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her for the reins. Hold on, he instructed, his breath tickling her ear. The ride to the trading post took just over an hour. They traveled in comfortable silence, each acutely aware of the other's proximity. For Abigail, there was something both thrilling and comforting about being enclosed in Weston's arms, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back. Henry Armstrong rushed out to meet them as they approached the trading post, his weathered face lined with worry. Abigail. Thank God, he exclaimed, helping her down from the horse. When you didn't return yesterday, I feared the worst. I was just organizing a search party. I'm fine, Uncle Henry, Abigail assured him, embracing the older man. Thanks to Mr. Keller, he saved me from the river. Henry looked up at Weston with gratitude shining in his eyes. Then I'm in your debt, sir. Please come inside. The least I can offer is a hot meal and my thanks. The trading post was a sturdy log structure with living quarters attached to the rear. Inside, the main room was filled with supplies, tools, and necessities for settlers and travelers. A pot-bellied stove provided warmth, and the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. After Abigail changed into clean clothing, they gathered around the kitchen table. Henry insisted on hearing the full story, shaking his head in dismay as Abigail described her fall into the river. She's lucky you were nearby, Keller, Henry said, refilling Weston's coffee cup. Not many men could have managed such a rescue in those flood waters. Just happened to be in the right place, Weston replied modestly. Well, right place or not, you saved my niece, and I won't forget it. Henry leaned back in his chair. You mentioned you're a horse trader. I've got a U.S. cavalry lieutenant stopping by next week looking to purchase mounts. Might be worth your while to bring some of your stock around. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Armstrong, Weston said with a nod. As he prepared to leave, Abigail walked him to where Thunder was hitched outside. The morning sun highlighted the golden strands in his dark hair, and she found herself studying the strong lines of his profile. Thank you again, Mr. Keller, she said softly, for everything. Weston turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. It was my pleasure, Miss Armstrong. Perhaps I'll see you when I return to speak with that lieutenant. I'd like that, Abigail replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. With a tip of his hat, Weston mounted Thunder and rode away, leaving Abigail watching his retreating figure until he disappeared from view. True to his word, Weston returned the following week with 6 Mustangs he had broken and trained. Lieutenant James Maxwell from Fort Laramie was impressed with the quality of the horses and purchased all 6 for the cavalry. Henry invited Weston to stay for supper, and Abigail found herself unusually concerned with her appearance as she helped prepare the meal. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, with Henry and Lieutenant Maxwell sharing stories of their experiences on the frontier. "Miss Armstrong tells me you're a botany enthusiast," Weston said during a lull in the conversation. "I came across some unusual flowers yesterday that might interest you, bright orange with spotted petals." "Tiger lilies," Abigail said, her eyes lighting up. "They're quite rare in this region." "Where did you see them?" "About 2 miles west, near a small creek," Weston replied. "I'd be happy to show you sometime with proper precautions against river mishaps, of course." Henry chuckled. "You'd better take an escort this time, Abigail. No more solo expeditions after what happened." "I'd be honored to serve as her guide and protector," Weston offered, his eyes meeting Abigail's across the table. The next day, Weston arrived at the trading post with Thunder and a gentle mare he introduced as Daisy. "Thought you might prefer your own mount," he explained as he helped Abigail into the saddle. The day was clear and warm as they rode west, following game trails through stands of aspen and pine. Weston pointed out tracks and signs that Abigail would have missed a hawk's nest high in a cottonwood, the subtle disturbance in the grass where a deer had bedded down, the claw marks on a tree trunk where a bear had passed. When they reached the creek, Abigail gasped with delight at the sight of the tiger lilies growing along the bank. She dismounted eagerly, pulling her journal and pencils from her saddlebag. "They're beautiful," she breathed, kneeling to examine the flowers more closely. "And you're right, quite unusual for this elevation." Weston watched her work, fascinated by her concentrated expression as she sketched the lilies and made careful notes about their habitat. Her passion for knowledge and discovery was evident in every movement. "You really do love this, don't you?" he asked, settling beside her on the grassy bank. Abigail looked up, a smile illuminating her face. "I do. There's something magical about documenting a species, preserving its beauty and essence through words and drawings." She touched a lily petal gently. "These flowers will fade in days, but the knowledge we gain from them can last generations." "I never thought of it that way," Weston admitted. "I've always appreciated the beauty of the wilderness, but not with a scientist's eye." "And I've never tracked a wild mustang or broken a horse," Abigail replied. "Perhaps we could teach each other." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Weston reached out slowly, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. His touch lingered on her cheek, and Abigail felt her heart quicken. "I'd like that very much, Miss Armstrong," he said softly. "Abigail," she corrected. "I think after saving my life, you've earned the right to use my given name." "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "Then you must call me West." Over the following weeks, Weston found reasons to visit Armstrong Trading regularly. He brought Abigail specimens for her collection, escorted her on botanical expeditions, and helped Henry with repairs around the trading post. For her part, Abigail looked forward to his visits with increasing anticipation, finding herself watching the trail for signs of his approach. One evening in late June, they sat on the trading post's porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Henry had gone to bed early, leaving them alone with the symphony of night insects and distant coyote calls. "I've been thinking," Weston said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The Army outpost at Fort Bridger needs 20 horses by month's end. It's a good contract, enough to finally purchase that land I've had my eye on." "That's wonderful news," Abigail said, though she felt a pang of disappointment at the thought of him leaving. "It's about 50 miles southwest of here," Weston continued. "Good grazing land with a year-round creek. Perfect for raising horses." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I'd like you to see it, Abigail." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Abigail studied his face in the fading light, seeing hope and something deeper in his eyes. "I'd like that," she said softly. Weston's hand found hers, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I've never met anyone like you," he admitted. "A Boston lady who can identify rare flowers, stand up to the hardships of frontier life, and still maintain such grace and kindness." Abigail felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "And I've never met a man who could save me from a raging river, gentle wild horses, and discuss botanical classifications over dinner." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Weston leaned forward. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. When they parted, Abigail found herself breathless, her heart racing beneath her ribs. "I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Armstrong," Weston whispered against her hair. "I never expected it, but there it is." "And I with you, Weston Keller," she replied, the truth of the words filling her with certainty. The journey to Fort Bridger took 3 days, with Henry accompanying them as propriety demanded. Weston's Mustangs impressed the fort's commander, who not only purchased all 20 horses but also expressed interest in a regular supply arrangement. With the contract secured, Weston took Abigail and Henry to see the land he intended to buy. It was everything he had described: a beautiful valley with lush grass, sheltered by gentle hills and watered by a clear creek. A stand of cottonwoods provided natural shelter, and distant mountains created a majestic backdrop. "What do you think?" Weston asked, watching Abigail's face as she surveyed the valley. "It's perfect," she breathed. "I can see why you love it." Weston took her hands in his expression serious. "I don't just want your opinion as a friend, Abigail. I want to know if you could see yourself here, with me." Henry discreetly moved away, giving them privacy while remaining within sight. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, West?" Abigail's voice was barely above a whisper. Weston nodded, dropping to one knee before her. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely 2 months. But when I pulled you from that river, something changed in me. It was as if I'd been searching for something all my life without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you were." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I'm not a wealthy man, and this isn't the kind of life you grew up expecting. But I promise to love you, protect you, and build something beautiful with you if you'll have me." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she looked down at the man before her. In Boston, she had received proposals from men of fortune and status, offers that would have secured her a life of comfort and social standing. Yet none had made her heart race like this simple cowboy with his honest eyes and gentle hands. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Weston Keller." Joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to his feet, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her off the ground. Their laughter echoed across the valley that would soon be their home. Henry gave his blessing without hesitation, having grown to respect and trust Weston over the past months. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the trading post, with a traveling preacher officiating and locals from miles around attending the celebration. As summer turned to fall, Weston and Abigail built their life together on the land they now called Keller Ranch. A sturdy cabin rose beside the cottonwoods, and corrals took shape to house the growing herd of horses. Abigail planted a garden and continued her botanical studies, corresponding with scientific societies back east and preparing illustrations for a book on Western flora. Word of Weston's skill with horses spread, bringing customers from as far as Denver and Salt Lake City. Abigail's knowledge of medicinal plants proved valuable to the local community, and she often assisted when the nearest doctor was too far away to reach in time. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, Weston placed his hand gently on Abigail's slightly rounded belly. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Giving up Boston society for this wilderness life with a simple horse trader?" Abigail covered his hand with hers, feeling the gentle movement of new life beneath their interlaced fingers. "Not for a single moment," she assured him. "That day in the river changed everything." When you refused to let me go, you weren't just saving my life, you were giving me the life I was meant to have." Weston kissed her tenderly, gratitude and love evident in his eyes. "I'll never let you go," he promised. "Not then, not now, not ever," and he never did. Through the years that followed, through the birth of their children, through droughts and harsh winters, through the joys and sorrows that shaped their shared life, Weston Keller kept the promise he made on the day he pulled Abigail from the flooded river. Together they built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a ranch that prospered, children who thrived, and a love story that became legend in the Wyoming Territory. By 1910, Keller Ranch had grown into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the West. Their eldest son managed the ranch operations, while their daughter had followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a respected botanist whose published works on Western plant species were used in universities across the country. On warm summer evenings, Weston and Abigail, now in their 60s with silver threading through their hair, still sat together on the porch of the home they had built. Sometimes they would ride down to the creek where tiger lilies still bloomed, their orange petals bright against the green grass. And sometimes, when the spring rains came and the rivers rose, they would look at each other with knowing smiles, remembering the flood that had brought them together and the love that had refused to let go.